May your life be increased.
All right. So we were talking a little bit about international relations as well as national relations and all that before we began. But the idea of nations is incredibly important throughout the book of Genesis. It doesn't actually use the term all that much, but Genesis is very much a template for how the later nation of Israel will understand the nations that surround them. And the nations which they will have relations for the whole middle section of Jewish history. So the term nation, there's a couple different variations within the Jewish terms, Jewish Hebrew language. One of them is, anybody know a word for nation in Hebrew?
Medina.
So Medina is state, right? So Medina is a political entity. It is the idea of there actually being a state of something. And just like in English, a state may or may not line up with a nation. And this is political science terminology. Medina is more of the political government organization. Whereas a nation, which is what we're seeing here, is an am or a goy. Right? An am or a goy. Right? So we are both an am, we are both a goy. That is to say, we are referred to by both of those terms throughout biblical literature. I know that in modern or contemporary Yiddish terminology, you would never call a Jew a goy, because that's just not the way that term has developed in Yiddish. But in proper Hebrew, absolutely.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
The Jewish people are one of the goy. Right? We are one nation. And then there are the other nations, the goyim, right? When used in the plural, of course, is then talking about everyone else. What is our relationship with the goyim, with the other nations? Well, what are some of the other nations that we've been meeting throughout this book of Genesis?
Well, we've met the Egyptians.
All right, so we've met the Canaanites, we've met the Egyptians. We've met a whole bunch over the last 10, 20 chapters. We've met a whole bunch of them. We just haven't been called that exactly.
Right. Esav is a nation.
Esav is going to be the father of a nation, right? That's where our Torah portion is right now.
Ammon, Moab.
Okay, so Amnon and Moab, which are the two sons / grandsons of Lot, are also two other major nations.
Shechem, is that a nation?
Shechem was part of the Canaanite confederacy. But what about Ishmael? What about Ishmael? Right? All of Ishmael and his descendants are also part of a nation. Right? So those are sort of
where are they?
They're considered to be along the Arabian Peninsula area and through the Jordanian wilderness out the other side. What's that?
Like Midian.
Midian, right, which is Arabian Peninsula. So we've basically got all of the nations that surrounded what would eventually be the land of Israel come from Abraham one way or another, right? They're either directly from Abraham and Ishmael or next generation through Esau, or also through Abraham's second wife, second/third wife, Keturah. But that was in Chayesera. You can go back and read the end of that parasha if you want to learn more about his other wife and the other kids they had, and therefore the other nations that are connected to them. So really our relationship to all these other nations is extended family. Right, these are cousins or brothers that are living in the region around Israel in the biblical times. Very important caveat. The Bavli says that when Sennacherib, the conqueror from the Assyrian Empire, came in and took the tribes out, he scattered all of the people, which was imperial practice at the time, so that the people who currently live in the zip codes that used to be Edom or Ammon or Moab are no longer considered to be Moabites, Ammonites, or Edomites, right? So if you visit the land of Jordan, you're not actually visiting among the Edomites, even though that was the territory that was occupied by the nation of Edom back in the day. Everyone got that, right? That we don't actually consider the people living in those parts of the world to be parts of those nations.
Because basically you took
everyone got shuffled.
and put it someplace else and put
in
a different population.
There was a stack of cards that said, Edomites, and there was a stack of cards from the opposite end of the Assyrian Empire, and the emperor took them and shuffled them together, and then said, you go there, you go there, you go there, you go there. So that way there would no longer be national identities that could then rebel against the Assyrian government.
Right.
It was actually very
Very
clever
clever.
and very destructive to the ancient world's cultures and systems. And we're one of the few people that actually were able to survive it, mostly because we were conquered by the Babylonians rather than the Assyrians. The ones who did get conquered by the Assyrians, the other 10 tribes, those are now lost. When we talk about the lost tribes, we're talking specifically about the people who were scattered during this time period of Sennacherib's attack on the north and near destruction of the south. So, but our relationship with the people around in the biblical times should have been, well, it should have been familial. What do we know about family relationships according to the book of Genesis?
No one seems to get along with anyone.
They ain't always so positive, right? So we have a hard time making good relationships with the cousins and brothers who live around us. And that is going to be our lead-in for understanding what to expect when Jacob is coming home. Because Jacob is now coming home kind of like a nation, right? When Jacob left, it was Jacob, right? With like not even a shekel to his name. Jacob coming back is coming back with 12 sons, 1 daughter, 4-ish wives, and a whole bunch of servants and other people that are working with him to manage the giant flocks and herds. So this is somebody coming back with a huge amount of capital and ready to set up shop back in the land of his forefathers, the land that he was basically given a big portion of. And his brother Esau, well, how do you think that reunion's going to go? Right? If we have anything to go off of from the previous 32 chapters of the book of Genesis, we're not expecting anything good. So you have to have that in mind. Even though we know how it's going to turn out, we have to have in mind what you should be expecting. Otherwise, how can the text subvert our expectations? And that's just a very good truism to always go through. I've mentioned it before, but I will continue to repeat it. You should always be thinking what would have been the normal expected thing to happen, so that when the Torah tells you something different, you can actually have the pleasure of being surprised. It's hard to do that when you've read the book 80 times, but you still have to put yourself in the right frame of mind each time you read it, as though you didn't know what was about to happen. And for some of us, maybe this particular section of the Torah may be so unfamiliar that it's easier to pretend like we don't know what's about to happen. But for those of you who've done it before, let's go ahead and see what it is. Page 203. We're going to pick up with chapter 33. Page 203, chapter 33. You may remember that we have had the whole dream sequence with Jacob wrestling with something, which we've talked about in previous discussions. We've also had Jacob divide up his family, hoping to avoid a total massacre. We've also had Jacob send gift after gift after gift with a whole sequence of servants, so that by the time Esau gets to him, he will have hopefully been placated with all of the goodies. Right? So that's what we've had building up to this point in chapter 33. We all there? Okay. Would you mind?
Looking up, Jacob saw Esau coming, accompanied by 400 men. He divided
Which
the
is a
children.
normal family reunion,
Yeah,
right?
400.
Yeah, right.
He divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 maids, putting the maids and their children first, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. He himself went on ahead and bowed low to the ground 7 times until he was near his brother.
All right, so let's make sure we understand the choreography there.
Yeah.
Right, he's dividing up the family, and yes, he is basically putting Rachel and Joseph in the best escape pod position,
Right.
where they will have the best chance of running because the others would be hit first, sort of that they could have waves of protection. Not pretty, and yes, he is definitely playing favorites here. But he himself is going up to talk to his brother, and he's doing it by walking forward, bowing to the ground, getting up, walking forward, bowing to the ground, he is absolutely debasing himself in front of his brother Esau.
But he's the product of a father who had showed favoritism.
And a mother.
And a mother, so he knows, that's right. So at least he knows how to arrange his family the right way.
He's following the family tradition of playing favorites.
His last memory was running for his life.
Yes, he's also following the family tradition of favoring the youngest. But
That's right.
you know, that's just Jewish history for it. All right, so he's coming closer and closer, and we have this expectation: 400 guys. This is not going to be pretty.
So as he's bowing to the ground, Esau ran to greet him. He embraced him, and falling on his neck, he kissed him, and they wept. Looking around, he saw the women and the children. "Oh, who?" he asked. Are these with you?" He answered, "The children with whom God has favored your servant." Then the maids with their children came forward and bowed low. Next, Leah with her children came forward and bowed low. And last, Joseph and Rachel came forward and bowed low. And he asked, "What do you mean by all this company which I have met?"
Right, all the servants who had gone in advance with all of the different loot and, well, not loot, but flocks and things that he was trying to give as a gift.
He answered, "To gain my Lord's favor."
He's straightforward for once in his life, right? They're a bribe.
Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Let what you have remain yours." But Jacob said, "No, I pray you, if you would do me this favor, accept from me this gift. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, and you have received me favorably. Please accept my present, which has been brought to you, for God has favored me, and I have plenty." And when he urged him, he accepted.
Okay, so first of all, just only because I made a high holiday sermon out of this, it does not say I have plenty. He says I have everything, right? Vayishlach kol, right? I've got everything, which is very different thematically than I have plenty. It's absolutely set up to be a contrast between the attitude of Esau, who says I have enough, which means I want more, and the attitude of Jacob, which means I have given away all of this, but I still have everything. But that's an aside. I can share the sermon if you'd like another time. But how do we judge Esau in this scene? Good guy, bad guy, mediocre guy, loving brother, conniving? How do you judge Esau?
Wow, I don't know what to say. Wow.
Right? You are a neutral observer. You're just sitting on your camel, watching these two guys come together. You know the family history. You're watching what happens right here.
He's amazed.
He's amazed at what?
All this, what happens in front of him. You know?
But amazed that it's so wonderful, it's so terrible, so what? So it's wonderful. All right. So Esau is good. He's a good guy.
I think he gets off with
The whole power thing
Jacob doing the supplicant and the bowing
and the gifts.
and the gifts. And I mean, Jacob seems to be very guilty, okay? Like a guilty conscience that he
is guilty.
He is guilty.
Yeah,
He stole the birthright. He's guilty.
yeah. So, I mean, he
He stole the blessing.
so
The
blessed.
birthright he traded.
That's right, the birthright he traded.
Full suit. But I think Esau gets off with,
The power,
yeah, I think the power thing is,
he's average. I wouldn't say he's evil, but
Right.
he's certainly willing to overlook past
Yeah,
anger, but it comes at a price.
the years took effect on him.
Okay, so
And
he's
kind of-
mellowed.
Mellow. Yeah.
He's only an arrogant, posturing, power-hungry kind of guy. He's no longer a murderer and somebody who would butcher and torture his brother. So he's gotten better, but he's still not what you could. He's still not what you call righteous.
It's still, he seems very proud of himself. He's got the 400 men. I have plenty. I have
Right.
this big revenue.
yeah.
Okay, so
I don't need all your stuff.
in the middle, basically, we can say he's got. Basically, he takes the gifts, right? He kind of lords it over, right? I've got plenty. I don't need this. What your flocks are unimportant to me. I don't need that because I've got so much. Even though we know what Jacob is giving is a substantial amount of wealth. So it seems like maybe he's just sort of a typical powery kind of warlord-ish, right? But then that puts us, well, actually the 400 guys to show up with, is that a display or was he planning to do evil until he had his ego stroked? Right? If someone is power hungry, does that mean they're a neutral person or does that mean they're a bad person who's avoided doing something bad today?
400 men for war.
It does not, right? So that's why it is ambiguous. Because, I often go out on road trips with 400 guys.
Yeah.
But they could be doing other stuff like tending the sheep or whatever.
Yes. So benefit of the doubt, we could imagine that perhaps he had all 400 of his shepherds all together for a big shepherd con,
meeting.
and they were doing, whatever their convention is. And it just so happened that was the time when Jacob was showing up.
But does Esau know what Jacob's intentions are? He may not
No.
know if Jacob's coming to
All,
get back at him or.
Jacob may be coming back to finish the job.
Finish- yeah.
because all Jacob knows is your brother Esau is coming and there's 400 men with him.
And
He
Esau's bringing
starts sending
and
out,
Esau's bringing 400 men because he doesn't know what Jacob.
So maybe Jacob is misinterpreting Esau. Maybe Esau is misinterpreting Jacob. Maybe it's just very confused. But this interesting that no one has mentioned the most famous phrasing of this whole incident to try and analyze whether Esau is doing good or bad here.
He accepts the apology pretty quickly.
Verse 4.
He embraced him,
He runs to greet him.
runs to greet
Right?
him.
Running to greet someone is not the sign in the ancient world of being the power person. Right? If you're the person running, rather than letting them come to you, you're showing that you are not standing on ceremony. So running is a very important symbol. Right?
But he doesn't do that until Jacob bows to him.
7
Okay,
times.
well, yeah, but that doesn't mean that he could have done it any earlier.
Oh,
But
that's right.
right, so but maybe right. These are things that they could mean, not necessarily it does mean. As we're going to see, our commentators are going to argue about this passage a lot. So it could be that he is showing genuine affection when he comes. He embraces him, right? He falls on his neck, he kisses him, and they cry,
And they cry.
And they wept.
right? And they cry. What do we make of this? Again, remember, in all of our human lives, we never get to know what's in another person's heart, ever. Right? All we ever know is what we see from a person's behavior and then how we interpret it. How could you interpret what Esau is doing here?
Sounds like an emotional family.
It is
It's an emotional family reunion, right? And maybe, dare I even say, loving, or at least somehow touching. That maybe Esau is not a saint, right? But maybe there is a part of him that is genuinely stirred for affection for his brother who he hasn't seen for 20 years, and who he separated with under the worst circumstances imaginable. So maybe now it's like, you know what? I've just missed you so much. Everything else is now forgotten, right? It's so good to see you again. That he grabs him, he hugs him. They literally fall on each other. And are crying together. It's very, very touching. Read through that way.
That he forgave or that he forgot?
Well,
No, there's only 2 of them. When you think about it, there's only always just been the 2 of them.
until we get to the 12 brothers. Yeah, we've only got the 2 kids.
So I mean, and they're twins and they share the same womb.
Yep.
So yeah, I can see where the emotion.
Unlike all the other brothers in this whole family cycle. Right? These are the 2 closest brothers in the
Right.
entire cycle. Benjamin and Joseph will get a slightly different, but they don't get to grow up together quite as much.
Right.
But there were only 2.
There
They
were
came from the
only
same mother, right? Which, remember, Isaac and Ishmael didn't, and the 12 tribes as a whole do not, right? So there is a unique bond that should have existed between Jacob
Right.
and Esau.
But they're very different.
They're very
characters.
different people. That's one thing the
But-
Torah has made very clear. But does that mean they
But-
can't actually love each other?
No,
Does that mean they can't be good
maybe
brothers?
This is that love, that the twins share, that kind of special connection and bond to each other because they grew up together with the same.
Right. It's such a special bond that Jacob decided to take advantage of it and convince his brother to sell his birthright. That doesn't actually sound so special bondy. They had such a special bond that he could pretend to be his brother and steal the blessing. It doesn't sound so
Well,
bondy.
it's very emotional. There was a lot of hatred. Now there's a lot of love, it appears.
And there's
Our
guilt.
Guilt.
Well,
probably.
perhaps, right? I mean, the kissing could be, about the relief of being together and the realizing that the pain of all the decades was wasted. It could be that they each recognized that the other misunderstood their intentions. Esau may be crying because in all of the gestures that Jacob is performing, he is showing that he still thinks that Esau is the guy from 20 years ago who promised to kill him. And Esau may be saying, I'm not that guy anymore, and cry because of the way Jacob is behaving. It's so sad that you still think I'm that murderous person, right? And vice versa. Jacob may be crying that he has been so estranged from his brother, and now his brother is the guy just there hugging him, and he thought the worst. Remember, this is the guy who was planning stages of family escape and trying to bribe him, and if he'd realized his brother was just his brother, he wouldn't have had to do all that. And how much did he misread what his brother? There are so many positive ways of reading this, which are entirely how the Midrash doesn't. Right. This is not the way classical interpretation reads this reunion.
Right.
So we're going to look at some of them. We're going to find some classical interpreters who do read it positively, but let's start off with the rough stuff that people will usually remember because it's paraphrased by Rashi, and that is usually the Midrash that everyone thinks is the only Midrash. All right. So this is the part of the form, the shortish form from Bereshit Rabbah.
The word kissed is dotted.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I should point that out.
Yeah.
Page 204. If you look at the very top in the Hebrew, you'll see that we have dots over all the letters of the word, and he kissed him, right, on the first line. See all those dots? Those are written in the actual Torah, meaning if you look in a real Torah scroll, even though there are no vowels, there are these little dots above each of these letters. Now, generally speaking, dots in the Torah means look at this word carefully. Now, exactly like underlining in a modern book. The question is exactly what are we supposed to get from these dots? That's what's open for interpretation. So Bereshit Rabbah is trying to interpret. Good?
Yeah.
Right.
Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said, it teaches that Esau felt compassion in that moment and kissed Jacob with all his heart.
Okay, so he kissed him. Why? Because he was emotionally connected to his brother. At least for that moment, they had that emotion together.
So Rabbi Yanan said to him, if so, why is it dotted?
Right? They don't need to underline the word kiss just to tell me that he meant the kiss. Right? That's what I would assume kissed means. Instead, with their dots, it should mean the opposite of what I would expect.
On the contrary, it teaches he came not to kiss, but to bite him. But our ancestor Jacob's neck became like marble, and that wicked man's teeth were blunted. Hence, and they wept, teaches that Jacob wept because of his neck, and Esau wept because of his teeth.
All right, so Jacob's going, my neck. Why'd you bite me? And Esau's going, my tooth, your neck is like marble, right?
Did you write this just to be funny?
I didn't write this. This is like 2,000 years old.
Oh my God.
Okay, so,
It's really bizarre.
all right. What in the world is going on here? Remember we started talking about nations. Jacob, the person, equals what nation as people?
Israel.
Right? He gets the name Israel. He got it just a little while ago. But when we're talking about nation, right, this is the person, and this is the nation. But when we talk about the nation, we also use the term Israel just generally to talk about the nation of Israel, the people of Israel, us, all of history.
All of us.
Esau is the person. What is the nation?
Rome and non-Jews.
Edom, which becomes, through multiple interpretations, Rome, and often
Non-Jews.
all non-Jews.
Doesn't it become Christianity?
It does become Christianity in the Middle Ages as well, where they say that Rome, because Rome becomes the papacy under the Catholicism, that also becomes a stand-in for Christianity. But before that happens, it is already also used just in generic term to talk about other non-Jewish nations. Like in general, that there's Israel and there's everybody else, right? And this was how they viewed the ancient world. Now, part of that was because Rome was everybody else as far as the Jews were concerned during the time of the Mishnah, Talmud, and Midrash being written, most of it. So if we read it this way, what is this Midrash actually saying? Not talking about the people, we're talking about the nations. Right? Reread the Midrash and substitute Jacob and Esau for Israel and the other nations.
So the other nations try to fall upon us to kill us.
It may look like they're friendly,
Right.
but in fact, they're trying to bite you.
And we are stiff-necked and solid.
And able to withstand it.
And withstand it.
But it still hurts us, and it hurts them.
Right.
Right? Them trying to tear us apart will hurt them, and it will hurt us, but we will be able to survive their attack, which often comes clothed in what appears to be friendly gestures. See what the Midrash is doing here? Right, the Midrash is not trying to give you a chuckle about Jacob and Esau and magic necks. The Midrash is trying to give you a lesson of the relationship between Israel and the other nations, at least as far as Rabbi Yanai saw it in his generation.
And certainly mouth is not just kissing, it's the words, it's.
Which is why we're going to see in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer a more expanded version of this teaching. Let me just make sure that's not my tech support. We're fine.
When Jacob passed to come into the land of Canaan, Esau came to him from Mount Seir in violent anger, contriving to slay him, as it is said, the wicked plots against the just and gnashes upon him with his teeth.
All right, so notice what this section from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is doing is bringing in verses from other parts of the Tanakh in order to try and explain this episode of the running, the grabbing, the kissing, the crying.
Esau said, I will not slay Jacob with my bow and arrows, but with my mouth and with my teeth I will slay him and suck his blood. Because it said, and Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Do not read Vayishlach and he kissed him, but read Vayishkehu and he bit him.
All right, so again, that wonderful way of being able to reread the Hebrew verses by substituting some vowels and a few little bits of letter play, right? Rather than saying kiss, it was bite.
But Jacob's neck became like ivory, and concerning him, the scripture said, your neck is like the tower of ivory.
Now, you'll notice that this midrash and the other midrash before is based off the whole issue of this verse, right? Ran, embrace, bite, or fall on neck, sorry, and then kiss, and then weep. So the fall on the neck is a little weird as a verb, right? Why would you fall in each other's necks? Now, it probably meant in idiomatic Hebrew just a deep embrace, right? To hug someone so much that your necks are like touching each other. But it also is just ripe for interpretation to mean literally like an animal would fall upon the neck. And then with only a slight change of voweling, you go from kissing to biting. Boy, this makes a lot more sense now. And this also fits the standard version of what Esau is like. Right? Esau is not somebody who suddenly is just all hugs and kisses. Right? He doesn't turn into a character out of My Little Pony because he sees his brother for 20 years and all of a sudden everything he's been doing that we know from the past is gone. Right? He is still a murderous, rampaging beast. Good. Well, not good, but and then we get, of course, the reference. Why would you ever say someone's neck is like ivory? Because this is referring to Jacob when he is being in his super defense mode against Esau.
The wicked's teeth became blunt, and when the wicked one saw that the desire of his heart was not realized, he began to be angry and to gnash his teeth, as it said, the wicked shall see it and be grieved. He shall gnash his teeth with his teeth and melt away.
Okay. And what happens here, of course, is that there's this interesting play that's a more expanded version of the biting and the hard neck and all of that, and more support from using actual wordplay as well as the other verses. But what has also happened is that they have generalized the story from being Edom or other nations versus Israel to being righteous versus wicked. So does that mean then that what we can say is, because righteous and wicked doesn't fit in my space that I've got left, right? That Jacob is good, Esau is bad, but that means that all non-Jews are bad. Or is it saying that they're not linked, right? It's not A equals B and B equals C, therefore A equals C. It's, you could read Esau as all bad people, or you could read Esau as all non-Jews, but that doesn't mean that they're absolutely the equivalents.
Right. Did we get good and bad again?
What's that?
How did we get Jacob's good and Esau?
Right here,
That's
right? When Jacob comes in, the wicked plots against the just. right? So Esau is being called wicked and Jacob is being called good or just. And then they sort of play that out throughout the rest of this interpretation. So, but the question is it just this half by itself and that half by itself, or 2/3? Or is this really meant to be all the way across? Right? Should we put the two midrashim together, which, as you can see, are telling basically the same story, and say they're telling the same story? It's just one's talking about bad people when what they really mean is all non-Jews, and one's talking about good people with what they really mean is all of Israel.
Back to your sermon.
Mm-hmm.
There's different attitudes. I have everything. I have plenty.
Okay, so
There's a whole different world view.
right, so maybe it really is. You can read it this way, or you can read it that way, right? You can either read it with Jacob and Esau being their national representatives, or you can read Jacob and Esau as being a moral representative, but that doesn't mean that you should draw the connection all the way across. That's very good, very interesting. Not exactly something that we have a great record for, because we do have records of the alternative. We do have records of rabbis who don't have a great opinion of people that aren't Jewish, which is what we're going to see in a few other texts. But we're going to eventually pull it back. Right? We're not going to go down the road of just it's all horrible and nasty, but we have to see some of the things that aren't pretty in order to understand their context, in order to understand their interpretation, and to also understand everything else.
You were talking earlier about our heritage and where we come from. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about the things I heard from my parents who grew up in Poland.
Right.
Pre-World War II.
They probably didn't have a high opinion of the non-Jews.
No, they would have absolutely, good and bad is exactly because they had to live in the ghettos and everybody out there was looking to kill them.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it was
Right.
good
Well, the
and
only
bad.
time you saw a non-Jew was when he was on a horse carrying a saber riding
That's
through the
right.
middle of your town, hacking at people.
Exactly,
You tended to develop a picture of non-Jews as being not so good people.
totally. And you had to say, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And we're going to see that was not only the case in Poland, that was also the case under Roman occupation. So
Right.
let's continue with Rabbi Yehuda, or Rabbi Judah. Yeah.
Rabbi Judah. Rabbi Judah commenced and said, what beautiful things this nation does.
In this case, they're talking about Rome. They're just sitting around chatting about
We're
Rome.
talking about the Jews.
Nope.
They organize markets, they repair bridges,
Oh, yeah.
they set up bathhouses.
Hey, they're civic, right? And by the way, if you've ever seen The Life of Brian, this is a wonderful scene that I don't know if they knew the Talmud, but there's a scene where they're like, what has Rome ever done for us? And someone says, the aqueducts?
Oh.
They actually begin to
Then
list
they
all of the
start-
things that
then
Rome
they
has
list
done
all
for the
those
countries
things.
that it occupied. But this was a real conversation.
Rabbi Yossi kept quiet. Rabbi Shimeon Bar Yochai responded and said, yeah, but whatever they set up only for their own convenience. Sure, they organize markets, but that's for places for their whores. Bathhouses to preen themselves in. Bridges to collect tolls.
Right? So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says it may be good stuff, but it's for wrong reasons. Right? So therefore, it's not good.
No, selfish reasons.
Right? They're not building bridges just because they want to let people have free places to be able to travel. They're not making bathhouses. They want people to be clean. Because they're vain, because they want to collect taxes, and their marketplaces, well, so they have a place to put these women that they're going to hire. So harsh, right? But again, if you were Shimon Bar Yochai, you were living under the horrible restrictions of Roman occupation after the destruction of the Second Temple. So this is already after a couple failed revolts, and just before we get into another failed revolt, that's absolutely the opinion you're going to have.
Judah, as Rabbi Judah, the child of proselytes, went and reported what they'd said.
Nobody likes a snitch.
So the government heard about it. They said, Judah, who promoted us, will be promoted. Yossi, who shut up, will go into exile in Sepphoris. Simeon, who badmouthed us, will die.
Which is how you end up with the story of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai living in a cave, because he's in hiding. Right? He's in the witness protection program, which is burying yourself naked in sand up to your neck. So that's where. But it's not so much fun. But it wasn't just him that had a problem, right? Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, who lived during the destruction of the Second Temple, also had a question to his students.
So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to his disciples, my sons, what is the meaning of scripture? Righteousness exalts a nation, but the kindness of the peoples is sin.
Okay, because it's kind of a weird sentence, right? What do you mean righteous of the people is sin?
But the kindness is sin. Rabbi Eliezer answered and said, righteousness exalts a nation. This refers to Israel. Who is like your people, Israel, one nation in the earth? But the kindness of the peoples is sin. That means all the acts of charity and mercy that the idolatrous nations do is a sin for them, for they do it only for their own self-aggrandizement.
And his proof is?
They may offer, it says, they may offer sacrifices of a sweet savor to the God of heaven and pray for the life of the king and his sons.
So why are they offering sacrifices?
To pray for the king.
To pray for the king and the son, right? Just for their own royalty, right? They're not offering sacrifices because they like God. They're not offering sacrifices because they recognize God as being the true ruler of the universe. They're offering sacrifices because they want to puff up their royalty. Right? Therefore, even though it looks like they're doing something good, they're actually doing something bad.
Now, when we offered sacrifices in the temple, which isn't here yet, weren't we doing that to pray for something?
Shush.
Oh,
No,
okay.
no. I mean that. So
Okay,
here's
sorry.
the problem: is as we go through this, does this really convince you that what they're describing is exclusively the behavior of the non-Jews? And are they describing the behavior of the Jews in perhaps a little bit more glowing terms than is right? I mean, after all, 90% of at least the book of the prophets is condemnation of the Jewish people, right? You read through, all of the prophets, and it is Israel is sinning this way, Judah is sinning this way, Ephraim is a rebellious son. It's not talking about how righteous Israel is. So read this not with a grain of salt, but read this as what are they trying to accomplish?
Samuel, it says, who is like your people, Israel, one nation in the earth?
All right, so he's copying off his fellow and saying, yeah, I agree with him on the first half.
But the kindness of the peoples is sin. All the acts of charity and mercy that the idolatrous nations do is a sin for them because they do it only to prolong their dominion.
With a quote from Book of Daniel.
Yeah.
Wherefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable to you, and break off your sins by righteousness and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, so there may be a lengthening of your tranquility.
Right, when he's trying to convince the king to do right, he doesn't say do right because it's right. He says do right because then you'll get to be king longer. Right? So therefore, they're obviously corrupt because no Jewish person has ever done a mitzvah for an ulterior motive.
Never.
Right? God never said, keep my commandments so that you may last long upon the land that I am giving to you. God never said that at all. A few dozen times.
Well,
Right?
Yeah.
So again, what is the underlying thing? What are they actually trying to say with this if they're not just describing history in its own objective terms? Rabban Gamaliel continues.
Yeah, he continued, he repeats, he answered and said, righteousness exalts a nation. This refers to Israel, where it said, who is like your people, Israel, one nation on the earth. But the kindness of the peoples is sin. All the acts of charity and mercy that idolatrous nations do is a sin for them.
Getting the habit here, the pattern.
Yes, for they do it only to put on airs. And whoever puts on airs is thrown into Gehenna.
Right, place of punishment.
It says, the proud and haughty man, scorner is his name, and he works in wrath of pride. And wrath is Gehenna. Because it says a day of wrath is that day.
From Zephaniah, right? So the idea is they're only doing it to make themselves, because they're arrogant and prideful, and they're showing off, and therefore that's terrible. Okay, now notice, we're going to break the pattern in the next paragraph. So before we get to that, I want to make sure we got this whole pattern. What is the same about all three so far?
If righteousness exalts a nation,
The-
is us.
Is us, right? They agree that righteousness exalts us, and what is the
same source.
and they use the same source, the same proof text for that. Right? So they do not seem to be, in quote, analyzing Israel at all. They're only analyzing the other nations. But the three things that they analyze them for are three things that Israel has been guilty of.
Right.
Oh,
Right? So they are analyzing the other nations and saying, yes, they're so bad, we're so great, they're so bad because look at what they do. But they are specifically targeting things that they do that were widely known to be problems within the nation of Israel. Right? For people to do things for ulterior motives, for people to do things for their own sake, not for the sake of the mitzvah, for people to do things because they're trying to show off and be prideful. Right? These were all issues that the rabbis constantly are dealing with of why do people keep the commandments and why should they keep the commandments and why they're not doing it for the right reasons. So this may be explicitly a criticism of the other nations, but implicitly it's also a criticism of how Israel has behaved over its history and especially during their own time. And so the rabbis are not just criticizing the nations, they are, by the very choice of what they are choosing to focus on here, also criticizing Israel itself. They're just doing it in a more polite way.
Yeah. Well, but if they're giving charity and taking care of others and doing these nice, I mean, even if they're doing it for the wrong reasons,
Mhm.
isn't it still good that this gets done?
That is exactly what the rabbis argue when it comes to Jewish people. Right? So the rabbis argue all the time. If someone does it for the wrong reason, but at least they're keeping the commandment, is that a good or a bad thing? And people will say, well, it's better to do it for the right reason. But if you do it for the wrong reason, it's better than not doing it at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? If someone comes to your house and they're a beggar and they're hungry and poor and you give them food, but you do it because you want to show everyone how wonderful and generous and kind you are. And you say, look, everyone, I am taking care of this poor person.
And I'm superior to him because
I have everything and he doesn't, because I'm careful with my money and I work hard, but he's lazy and a lout, but I'm going to give him food anyway because that's the kind person I am. This is not someone who gets the gold star, but this is someone who has actually done something good. And we don't tell him, well, if that's your attitude, don't give him food. We say, if that's your attitude, give him food and then change your attitude.
Yeah.
So it seems a bit unfair to be criticizing them for having the wrong attitude when we've already said in other parts of Jewish literature that doing the right thing for the wrong attitude is better than not doing it at all. So it seems uncomfortable, which is why we're not done yet, because Rabbi Nehunya is going to push it a little bit further.
Yeah, he's going to repeat, righteousness exalts a nation, but the kindness, okay, that's for Israel.
Oh, no. He changed.
Oh, righteousness exalts a nation, but the kindness for Israel.
Boom.
Boom.
He breaks the sentence
Oh.
after the but.
Oh,
So that way he can include righteousness and kindness for Israel.
oh.
Right? Even though the sentence structure does not lend itself to doing a pause there at all, he wants to claim both righteousness and kindness for Israel, so that what's left for the other people?
But sin is for the people.
Exactly. I don't even get doing good for the wrong reason. They get nothing. They just sin. They never do anything good. It's not even they make bathhouses to be because they're vain. It's they don't make bathhouses. But don't they?
Yeah.
Don't they make bathhouses? All right, so let's see where we go with this.
Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan said to his disciples, when Rabbi Nehunya has said, what Rabbi Nehunya has said makes more sense than what I have had to say and what you have had to say, since he assigns righteousness and mercy to Israel, but to Gentiles, sin.
All right, so totally bizarre.
Yeah.
How can Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai say that his interpretation is superior to both his own, which we're going to see in a second, as well as all the others, when it is the one that does the least service to the grammar of the original quote, as well as seems to deny the fact that they have actually done things that are objectively good, even if they were done for ulterior motives. It really seems like a weird interpretation. But to understand it, we have to then see how the Talmud, which is carefully edited, puts Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's interpretation last, even after the teacher has supposedly discredited his own teaching.
What was it that he said?
Right? What was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's interpretation?
It is that which has been taught on Tanaite authority. Said to them, Rabbi Yochanan, just as a sin offering atones for Israel, so an act of charity atones for the nations of the world.
Okay, so if you go back and read that whole verse, right? Righteousness exalts a nation, but kindness, right? But the kindness of the people is sin, right? What he's doing is saying righteousness was the sacrifices of Israel, and that was what would atone for our sins. And kindness was what other nations would do, and that was what atoned for their sins. Seems a little different than all the other ones, doesn't it?
Very different.
Right? His interpretation, originally at least, was the people of other nations, they do commit sins, but they also do kindness, and their kindness cancels out their sins. Right? That's the way it works for them. We had a whole sacrificial system. We had all of our stuff that we did for our sins. For their sins, they did kindness. That was the way they fixed their sins. That was how they did atonement. So why would he possibly say that Rabbi Nehunya, with the whole kindness and righteousness was 100% for us, and they got nothing but sin? Why would he possibly say that was a more accurate statement? Why would he have said one thing at an earlier time and now he's like rejecting his own words? When did Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai live?
Destruction of the Second Temple.
Destruction of the Second Temple. Literally at that moment, literally having to be smuggled out of the city in a coffin and having to go beg to the would-be emperor for mercy, which he didn't get for the Jerusalem, but was at least able to save just Yavne and its scholars to be able to maintain Judaism as a functional religion. That kind of thing can change your thinking about non-Jews. Just like your family who lived through all of the horrors of Eastern Europe can really change how they relate to non-Jews. Just like those who went through the Holocaust really had very, shall we say, deep feelings about many of the people, especially Germans, after the war. So too, it's not surprising that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had a very strong opinion about the non-Jews after he had watched all of the catastrophes of the destruction of the Second Temple and the Great War between Israel and Rome unfold. They are human people. And he probably had a higher opinion, which he then regretted when he saw the horror that was unfolding upon his people. That's not surprising. And all the other people, being his disciples, are younger. They grew up with the harsher oppression, and therefore we shouldn't be surprised that they also have a harsher view of the non-Jews. And people do tend to have their opinions formed based upon the experiences that they are going through. And they will change their interpretations to match the experiences they're living through. There's a whole statement about certain commentaries of Rashi from some of the books of prophets. He changed. And his relationship to some of his non-Jewish neighbors, he changed after the Crusades began. Right? Because after the Crusades began, which was right when Rashi was alive and the height of his writing and power, he's like, well, fine. This is the way you're going to behave? Why should I be trying to help you understand our text? Why should I be writing things that are at all, somewhat balanced about you and the Christian world around me? You guys are murdering people. Because remember, the Crusades didn't just go off and kill Muslims. They butchered thousands and thousands of Jews in Europe as practice before they went off to the others on their way. Exactly. Because you got to make sure your sword is sharp. He's like, it totally changed his view of what the Christian world was. And in fact, the Crusades changed the worldview of many Jews in Europe. That they thought, look, we're definitely not first-class citizens in Christian Europe, but we can get along with them. And then as the Crusades began to unfold, they went, whoa, these aren't the neighbors we thought you were. Right? Whoop. That okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. This is, whoa, it's like living next door to someone and then you find out they're a serial murderer. It's like, whoa, I thought you were just a nice, quiet neighbor, kept to themselves, never caused any trouble, didn't realize what you were burying in the basement. Right? That was the attitude of many Jews when the crusade began. And also was the attitude of many Jews who lived in Europe at the time of the Shoah, especially in the Western countries. Things had been getting better and they thought their neighbors were friends.
Yes.
And then when the Germans showed up, the neighbors said, yeah, they're the Jews, you can take them. And it's like, what? but we go to the same cafe. What are you talking about? It was a very rude awakening. However, despite that, there are still embedded within our texts a deeper understanding of all of this, which is why in Sanhedrin we'll
says,
hear,
righteous people of all nations have a share in the world to come.
Right, when Judaism is not being threatened and attacked, the universal voice is that universally righteousness is good among anyone. There are righteous people in all nations, and all of them indeed have a place in the world to come, which is going to bring us back to the guy, Esau. Okay. Was he a nice guy or not?
Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, it is a rule that it is common knowledge that Esau hates Jacob, but his pity was aroused at that moment, and he kissed him wholeheartedly.
All right. Who was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? We saw him before.
Disciple of?
He was not a disciple of Hillel. He was a disciple of Akiva. But he was the one who said they're only building bathhouses because they're vain. They're only building bridges for their taxes. Right? And yet here, even though he would say Esau equals everyone else, he is saying at this moment Esau was actually having real emotion. Right? He's not saying Esau was trying to bite him in the neck. He's saying when Esau came in to kiss him, he was a brother kissing a brother. And that was genuine emotion. It's not that he was always a nice guy, but at that moment, it really, you have to take it at face value that this was a touching moment between brothers. Right? As much as Shimon Bar Yochai is not happy with the non-Jews and the Roman world, which Edom stands in for, which Esau stands in for, when he reads this text of the two brothers, he sees them as two brothers. Okay, onward.
The Midrashic interpretation of the dots on top of the word "and he kissed him" is good for those who have just been weaned.
Okay, what does that mean? Babies.
Oh, baby.
Sure. If you're a stupid little kid and you read, ooh, he tried to bite him and his neck turned to marble, then that's a great story, right? Good for the animated version. And also probably good if you were teaching little kids in the Middle Ages. Remember, this is Rashi. Sorry, Ibn Ezra. You're trying to teach little kids in the Middle Ages about the non-Jews. You should teach them to be a little bit suspicious. Right? If a non-Jew comes up and wants to kiss you, he might be trying to bite you in the neck, right? You'd want your little kids to be careful of strangers, especially strangers from what can be a hostile other group. But that doesn't mean that that's the adult version of understanding this, right? That's the baby story. What's the real way to read it?
Because according to the straightforward interpretation, Esau did not plan to do evil to his brother. And the proof is, and they cried, which is also in the reunion of Joseph and his brothers.
Right. When we look at reunions of brothers and we look at crying, we have the famous example of Joseph and his brothers. We don't suspect that they were all trying to do evil to each other there. Why would we suspect Esau of doing evil here? Right? And remember, both sides are crying. They're both touched. They're both feeling this emotion. And so we should take it at face value. Esau, at least for this moment, was being a loving brother reunited with his brother after so many years apart and so much emotional pain. All right. And we know that kissing was important because we saw it just a couple chapters ago at the very end of Vayishlach. Mm-hmm.
You did not even let me kiss my sons and daughters goodbye. It was a foolish thing for you to do.
These are the words of Lavan when he is chasing down Jacob and saying, why did you run away and not let me give you a farewell party? Right? And what's he saying? You didn't even let me kiss. Right? Kissing was what you did. This was a deep emotional attachment. Now, whether Lavan was 100% genuine in his feelings, that we can argue another day. But certainly it does seem like this idea of kissing as a form of love was a standard expression in the ancient world, just like it is in the modern world. Good? Good. All right. One more?
It said they wept. At that moment, love for Esau awakened in Yaakov as well.
All right, so what is he picking up on here? They wept. Esau ran. Esau embraced. Esau fell on the neck. Esau kissed. They wept. Right? Suddenly we're in a plural verb. And he wants to know, why are both of them crying? Right? Esau should be crying. He's the one that's all emotional here. Why is Jacob crying? And he's saying because at the moment that they embrace, Jacob actually feels something towards Esau too, other than fear. Right? He actually cares about his brother too, rather than just fears his brother. And then he's going to take this and go right back into our national rubric.
Similarly, whenever Esau's descendants genuinely acknowledge Israel's greatness, Israel reciprocates with feelings of brotherhood.
Right? It's not that Israel hates Esau. It's that Israel has been hurt by Esau. But when Esau treats Israel well, Israel will love Esau back. And that's all that's waiting, is just stop the hate. and there can be brotherly love. It's not all of you are terrible, all of you do this only for your selfish reasons, all of you do this because you have ulterior motives, we're only righteous and kind, you're only sinning. No, that's only when Rome is murdering thousands and thousands of people that it feels that way. But when Rome stops murdering, when people stop behaving horribly, then Israel also reciprocates with love and brotherhood towards the other nations. And just to try and bring this all together, Sforno brings it back to some of our own problems, as well as what this has meant for how Jews have had to live the last 2,000 years.
And when did Sforno live?
Sforno was Italian in the 15th century, 16th century?
Long before
Yeah.
our current times.
Yeah.
Esau's attitude changed suddenly when he realized to what extent Jacob had humbled himself before him.
Right? So this goes back to our original discussion of maybe Esau was just being friendly because Jacob was bowing a whole lot.
Yeah.
Right? And maybe that did make the difference.
It is of great concern to us, seeing that we live among the descendants of Esau, people who are arrogant, who consider themselves invincible.
Right? That's pretty much the European attitude of those centuries.
Jacob's conduct vis-a-vis Esau teaches that the only way to escape the sword of Esau is through self-degradation and gifts.
All right, think about that as your life lesson. You're living in the time of the ghettos, you're living in the time of rising anti-Semitism, and what you tell your kids is, how do we live among the nations? We buy them off, and we flatter their ego, and we make sure that we bow and scrape, and
And if one of them is walking towards you on the sidewalk, get off the
you,
sidewalk.
you
and let them
humiliate
walk.
yourself, you stand in the gutter, because otherwise they'll kill you.
Yeah.
Because they can, and they will. And they've shown that tendency over and over and over. So right now, what we got to do is we get in the gutter and make sure that they can pass. We are the ones who bow, we scrape, we buy them off, we bribe them for our own lives. That's how we have to live. The proof is in Jacob and Esau.
And how'd that work out?
Well, so continue reading.
Okay. This corresponds to what our sages taught us in Tanis, that the curses of the prophet Achia Hishiloni were more beneficial to the Jewish people than the blessing showered upon them by Bilam.
What?
Achia had cursed the Jewish people, describing them as a reed which bends in all directions, a reference to someone demeaning himself rather than facing up to adversaries.
And that was the better lesson, right, than Bilam. Because Bilam was teaching about a scepter will rise from Israel, and Israel will be strong, and Israel will trample their enemies. And apparently that attitude caused trouble.
If the Jewish people during the period of the Second Temple had taken Achia's advice to heart, the temple would not have been destroyed. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai testified to this when he said, if not for the militant extremists, the Romans would not have destroyed the temple.
All right. So actually, historically, they're kind of right? Up until the late 19th century and now the 20th and 21st century, Jews were better off not going military, not going violent. Right? Every time we had gone violent in the time periods before that, it caused murder and destruction par excellence. It was only with the rise of, well, liberty, first of all, for Europe and then the United States especially, but also with the establishment of Israel, where the Jews actually could use enough violence to protect themselves from those who would use violence against them, that this no longer seems to be the case. And now Judaism is protected by those who are willing to stand up for our rights. But I will tell you that there are many people who are not so sure. As anti-Semitism continues to climb, at least within this country and Europe and other parts of the world where we thought it had gone away, there are many people who are saying, well, maybe we need to keep a lower profile.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe we need to bend like a reed. Maybe we shouldn't make such a stink. Maybe we shouldn't be so active and draw attention to ourselves.
I was gonna say, but the Baal Kokhba and the destructions of these temples happened with the Jewish state and their ability to, try to defend themselves.
Well, they had the ability. That's his point, right? That's Forno's point, is that it was the people who sought war that brought the war down upon us. If we had just been more submissive to Rome, we would not have received the horrible punishments that Rome put upon us. Right? If they had just said, you pay Roman their taxes, you don't try and fight. If they want to change the way we do X, Y, and Z, you put up with it, then we could have avoided everything.
Because this will pass.
It's better to be poor and humiliated and alive.
I thought they were trying to repeat the events of the Maccabees.
Well, they were. And Sforno, as well as the entire rest of the rabbis of the Talmud, thought that was stupid. Right? The rabbis of the Talmud and the rabbis who have led Judaism for 2,000 years since the destruction of the temple thought that these zealots were absolutely the wrong people to be leading Israel at that time. That's why, when I go to Masada or teach about Masada, I point out the people who were on Masada were terrorists. They were viewed as terrorists by the Jews. They were viewed as terrorists by the rabbis for 2,000 years. It was only when Israel, the modern state, needed a symbol of their willingness to strive and defend that they settled on Masada. But unfortunately, that symbol historically is a very problematic one. There are better examples of Jewish freedom fighters. You just don't get a better location because it's just such a magnificent vista and a magnificent physical symbol. But the actual people who were there are not heroes.
Wasn't Akiva one of the people who, Rabbi Akiva,
Yep.
one of the people who supported the fighting?
He was. And all the other rabbis said, Akiva, you'll be dead and gone before the Messiah comes. And this is only going to cause pain. And they were right. Right? The Bar Kokhba revolt is actually what led to our full expulsion, not the destruction of the temple even. If we'd learned our lesson after the destruction of the temple, there still could have been a Jewish presence in the land that was strong and proud for the last 2,000 years. It was Bar Kokhba that made the Romans say, no, we're making life impossible for you here. So yeah, we've had a long trouble with this. But it does mean that we have to continue to review. What is our relationship to the other nations? What is their relationship to us? And how can we try to make sure that the period that we are now enjoying for the last 60, 70 years, which has been the best period for Jews in history, continues to be good or even better? Because it is not a given, right? The relationship between us and our brothers is a rocky one. We can't look at them as always being our enemy. We can't look at them as always being our loving brothers, because history tells us that both of those are wrong. We have to make sure we navigate these relationships better than our historical ancestors have, because we've got it really good right now, and it is always possible to be taken away. All right, take care. Oh, a reminder, from next week until January 16th or whatever Wednesday is after that, I will be on sabbatical, which means we will not be having classes on Wednesday for those 4 weeks. Next week until the 16th, exactly.
This is the last.
So this
This is the last until 2020. I can look up the exact date if you'll give me a second, because I'm just not good at memorizing dates. That's why I like the Hebrew calendar. The dates don't change. It will be January 22nd will be the next class. The 16th is a Thursday.